All right. Welcome everybody to a super special event of the Explorers. Just want to start off with a big apology from Jimena Perry. She is so fantastic and always present, but I think some of her flights got changed and she can't make it today. So you're stuck with me, I'm sorry. But today we are joined by David Serio and Crystal McColl from the Arab American National Museum. David is a third-generation Arab American whose family originates from Lebanon and is the current curator of education at the museum and holds an MA in Near Eastern Studies and Arabic from Wayne State Museum. Mr. Serio has been with the museum since 2011 and conducts educational workshops and presentations in person and online, including cultural events and youth programs such as the SURA Academy of Photography. David is also a coordinator and curator at the Arab Film Festival and sits on the board of the Anton Art Center, Macomb County Pride, Friends of Detroit Film Theatre, and the DAFT. Crystal McColl is a curatorial specialist at the museum and is responsible for exhibits and also serves as co-chair for the artists and resident community. Crystal holds a BA in art history from Oklahoma State University and an MA in Middle Eastern Studies from the University of Michigan. All right, that is a very impressive list of accomplishments there, guys. Oh, is it not letting me share the screen there?
Oh yeah, it's just saying host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Maybe. Did that
Perfect.
work?
Yes,
Perfect.
awesome. Thank you.
All right, take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you guys so much for having Crystal and I. It's a real pleasure to have everybody here. So we're excited to talk a little bit about the Arab American National Museum and kind of who we are, what we do, the communities that we're talking about when we talk about the term Arab American, and a little bit about our collections, our preservation, and really like what it means to tell the story of the Arab American community. That's a really big responsibility. And we'll talk a little bit about the countries that we're talking about when we talk about Arab Americans, kind of like what region of the world, what countries consist of that homeland. And it's a big job, especially once you see the countries that we identify as Arab world countries and how we represent and tell the stories from all of those countries. And of course, within those countries, there's many diverse perspectives, religions, cultures, languages, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll talk a lot about what Crystal and I really do at the museum. I want to share a really short video. And I think it'll give you just a good introduction as to who the museum is, kind of why we exist, what we do, a little glimpse into our exhibits. And then following that following that video, I'll share a brief presentation with you, and then I'll pass it over to my wonderful colleague, Crystal. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And if for any reason, you are not able to see the video, hear the video, or if it's like really, really choppy, I am more than happy to stop the video and share it as just a link you all can view on your own. But we'll try it. All right. So it's about 4 minutes long, so it's a little longer. But I think it's a really great video, and I think it really captures exactly who we are as the museum. So we'll watch this, and then I'll jump into my presentation. And again, if you can't see it or hear it, please let me know.
Since the late 19th century, Arab Americans have been an integral part of United States history. Immigrating from regions in Southwest Asia and North Africa, they arrived here, searching for economic opportunities, seeking refuge, or to build a new home. Each person with a story of their own. These stories live on through photos, documents, and heirlooms that together tell a larger story of the lived experiences brought to light by the first and only Arab American National Museum.
These artifacts, these objects, they're the stuff of history. Each object can tell us something about the lives of the earliest Arab immigrants or even the most recent ones. By collecting and preserving these objects, we're able to understand and record and document the stories that make up the Arab American community's history and allows us to understand their impact and share them with present and future generations.
The Arab American National Museum is our necessary and compelling storyteller, representing our diverse and rich culture through literature, research, art, and music. Our mission to document, preserve, and present the history and contribution of Arab immigrants and their descendants began in 2005 in Dearborn, the heart of Arab America.
It serves as such an anchor in our community, not just here in Dearborn, but it has such an international reputation. And their collections and what they do to keep the stories alive, to preserve the stories, to preserve that culture is so critical to our society in general.
The museum has drawn tens of thousands of visitors each year from all 50 states and different countries around the world to explore our core galleries and engage with the local community. From Dearborn to Ellis Island and reaching as far as Los Angeles and Houston, the Arab American story has been shared in cities across the nation. Our temporary and traveling exhibitions shine a light on how immigration has shaped the lives of Arab Americans today and how Arab Americans have in turn shaped this country.
The museum gives me a home for my ancestors, a place I can return to again and again to visit and celebrate where and who I come from.
A proud Smithsonian affiliate and accredited by the American Alliance of Museums, the Arab American National Museum educates, engages, and inspires our community to continue expanding the Arab American narrative.
Together, the Arab American National Museum and the Smithsonian are able to tell a more complete American story. Telling this American story through an Arab American lens is so important because it reminds us all what it means to be human and what it means to be a citizen of the United States.
Through youth programs and family-friendly activities, we build a new generation of museum goers, bringing students into our space to learn about their culture and the culture of their peers.
To learn to be the artist I want to be.
To learn that art can be whatever I want it to be.
To learn from and teach each other about our story.
To teach people about beauty and diversity.
The museum has always stood as a national hub for hosting community dialogue, producing and sharing knowledge, and curating thoughtful programming. Today, we continue to foster a community of arts and culture, and we provide a space for us to fully and creatively express ourselves.
Where we can represent ourselves.
To tell my story.
To raise my voice.
At its core, the museum is home to every Arab American across the nation, welcoming people near and far into our doors to experience our unique and incredible story. It is a museum that tells many stories created by us and for us, and carries our legacy forward for generations to come.
All right. So I hope that video came through relatively clearly through your computer. But I hope it'll just give you a nice sense as to who we are as the Arab American National Museum and really the importance and why we were created and kind of established, and then the work that we're continuing to do. And we're going to kind of unpack some of the things that video had mentioned. So again, the Arab American National Museum, as the video said, just as a quick recap, is the first and only museum in the entire country that is dedicated to preserving, documenting, and presenting the history, culture, and contributions of Arab Americans. So there's nobody in the entire country that's doing the work that we are doing. And of course, that is very essential work for a variety of reasons. We are, as the video mentioned, also a Smithsonian affiliated institution accredited by the American Alliance of Museums and also situated in Dearborn, Michigan. If you're familiar with the area, I'm not sure if anybody is, but we are at the intersection of Schaefer and Michigan Avenue, directly across from Old City Hall. And so the area that the museum is in is kind of known as East Dearborn, and that is home to a very large Arab immigrant, but also like second second generation and beyond, of course. But really primarily like an immigrant and also like well, I guess first generation would be, well, it depends on how you look at it. But recent immigrants and or like their offspring are situated really right around the museum. And so our museum is kind of nestled in like the largest concentration of Arab Americans really in the country, Dearborn, and then of course expanding into Metro Detroit. And so we're also an institution of Access. So Access has been around for about 50 years. 50 years, providing social services to folks in the community. And really, to understand the start of the museum is to understand the start of Access. And so Access came about in 1971. A couple of years prior to 1971, it really began as a group of like Arab Americans, activists, and folks very connected to the community, saw a very large influx of immigrants and refugees coming in the 60s at this time. And so folks in the community got together and said, you know what, like there's a lot of folks coming here, like they don't really know what to do. Maybe like let's help them find some essential services, right? Let's find them, let's get them situated with a job. Let's get them on the path to citizenship. Let's find them, if they have medical needs, find them doctors. Let's maybe have them start learning English. So folks kind of pooled together and said, let's kind of help these folks get on their feet. Whatever their needs might be. And that pool of volunteers continued to grow and grow until it became, they formed Access again in 1971. And the same process is kind of true with the museum. That same group of folks saw, a need that was not necessarily available at the time. And so folks in the community, again, got together and said, you know what, there is no institution, no story, no institution that's really able to tell the story of the Arab American community. And so again, folks got together and said, you know, we need an institution that institution that really essentially tells the Arab American story, that preserves the story for future generations, that educates people, that dispels stereotypes. And that's one of the major catalysts behind the museum being created, is that there was no institution like it in the country. And it was really a way to educate the general public, both Arab American and non-Arab American, and then also inspire people to, engage with the museum. And then also like to inspire and engage with Arab Americans who, whether they were recent immigrants or third, fourth, fifth generations, to be proud of their history, their culture, and really to kind of inspire them. Right. So in short, the museum exists as the only one in the museum to really kind of insert the Arab American story that is often left out of the fabric of history, whether intentionally, unintentionally, and kind of everything in between. So that's a little bit of background as to why the museum exists. We opened our doors May 5th, 2005. So we're just about 17 years old, or a little over 17 years old. So we're still a younger institution. But again, we've done some really awesome and impressive things, including our Smithsonian affiliate status, and also our accreditation status. So we're going to talk a little bit about Arab Americans, right? So if we're going to talk about the museum and our preservation and things like that, we can't really go forward until we have an idea as to what type of folks we're talking about, right? So the term Arab American comes with a lot. There's a lot of things that probably pop into our minds when we think of Arab Americans. But what I'm going to do is I have a series of like 3 slides I'm going to show you. I'd like you to tell me in these next few slides, and you can unmute yourself since we're a pretty small group, or you can use the chat. I'd like you to tell me if you recognize these people by name, who are they? And if you don't, what can you tell me about their photos? All right, so let's start with these 2. So again, utilizing the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to. Can you tell me who either of these individuals are if you recognize them?
I'll take a stab at the guy on the right. I'm going to say his name wrong, probably. Shaloub, is that, is an actor on Monk, right? And I'm
Absolutely.
embarrassed that I don't know the other person.
No, that's okay. Thank you, though. Yeah, so we have Tony Shalhoub here on the right, who is very well known in the acting field, right? So he's been in Monk, which is one of his major acting achievements, I suppose, right? He's been in Monk. He's also been in numerous TV shows and movies kind of before that and possibly even after that. So very well-known guy who's Arab American. His family comes from Lebanon. And then on the left, we have Rashida Tlaib, who's probably a little bit more locally known, or if you're a politics nerd like myself, you may know her, but she is the first Palestinian American woman and one of the first Muslim American women in Congress, representing one of Michigan's districts here since 2019. Okay, so both are Arab American. Both are Arab American. Even though there's some differences, they both identify as Arab American. Okay, what about this one? This one might also be relatively easy. Do you recognize either of these women? Any idea who these folks might be? And if not, that's okay too. Ooh, I see something in the chat. Let me take a quick peek. Okay, no worries. So it's good that you at least recognize them. You've seen their faces. You might have seen them somewhere. So we have Kathy Najimy, who's a pretty well-known activist and actress. She's done numerous films and TV shows, including Hocus Pocus. So if you have seen the newest Hocus Pocus and the old one, of course, she is Mary. She's the witch Mary. She's also been in Sister Act. She also has been in King of the Hill. So she voices Peggy Hill in the show. And exactly, Angel. Yep. So Bella Hadid. So Bella Hadid is a very well-known supermodel. She was voted Supermodel of the Year in 2016. So both identify as Arab American, even though we have some diversity here. They both identify as Arab American, right? And again, so you may have seen them in like pop culture or in TV shows or in pop culture. You may not have associated Arab Americanness, right? Arab American identity with them, which of course is okay. A lot of people may not necessarily, but that's why the museum exists, is to kind of highlight like the achievements that Arab Americans have made and how visible that we actually are as a community. This one I'll give you as a freebie. They're not as well known necessarily, but they still are, very impressive folks in their own right. And you can kind of tell from the background who these folks might be or kind of what they're associated with. So we see the guy on the left holding some type of microphone. We see the guy on the right being involved in comics or DC Comics specifically. So we have Odyssey, which is his stage name, who is from Sudan, who has been in the music scene for a couple of decades now. He's performed at the Arab American National Museum. And then on the right, we have Jeff Johns, who's also, pretty well known in the comic book world. So if you've ever seen the movies or read some of the comics like Green Lantern, Aquaman, Flash, or Superman, you very well may have seen his work. So again, both identify as Arab American. There's definitely some diversity between these two folks in terms of physical characteristics, countries of origin that they connect to, industry that they're in, but they both identify as Arab American. So exactly what part of the world are we talking about when we're talking about Arab Americans? This is what we're talking about, right? So again, just in an effort to get to know the community a little bit better, this is the part of the world that we're talking about. We are talking about these 22 different countries that are considered to be a part of the Arab world. So with the Arab American National Museum, our goal is it's a very lofty goal, and one we do relatively well, I think, although there's always room for improvement, is we tell the story and the culture and the history and the all these pieces from folks that come from one or more of these 22 different countries. So there are 10 countries in Northern Africa, 12 in Southwestern Asia, giving us 22, of course. There might be some surprises for you all. If there are any surprises, feel free to kind of drop those in the chat. I'm curious what you think of when we look at this map. It's very common for folks to be relatively surprised, and totally understandable. As an Arab American myself, I was very surprised when I saw that like countries like Somalia was considered to be Arab. Even the Comoros Islands, which are pretty far south from these countries, I was very surprised to learn that they're also an Arab part of the Arab world. And so with the Arab world, we talk about three unifying factors, right? There's three unifying factors. And again, I would love to hear if you have any ideas. So what do you think makes these countries uniquely Arab countries? Any ideas, any initial things come to your mind if we're talking like unifying factors between these countries and hence between the people? Oh, very good. Thank you, Claire. Yep. So language. Language is one of our unifying factors. All 22 countries have Arabic as their official language. Now, anytime we talk about unifying factors, we also talk about the similarities, but also the differences that exist, right? So at the end of the day, these are 22 independent countries. So there's definitely some uniqueness there, but in general, there's some unifying factors, right? So language is one of our unifying factors. All 22 countries have Arabic as their official language, but there's also some differences, right? So the proper Arabic is something that is more of a unifying aspect, right? So if you speak proper Arabic and you live in Algeria and you're calling your friend in Yemen, you're able to communicate just fine. The dialects are really where we see some of those major differences, right? Not only from country to country, but within each country as well, right? So language is one of those unifying factors. Religion is also a very commonly guessed answer. We don't use religion necessarily as a unifying factor. When we look at the major monotheistic religions, they do come from this part of the world, right? They're all kind of originating in this part of the world. But we do have a lot of religious diversity that exists here, right? So we do have folks who are Muslim, but we also have folks who are Christian. There's over 14 million Arab Christians in many of these, all throughout the Arab world. You also have Arab Jewish populations, small but existing Jewish populations in countries like Yemen, Tunisia, Morocco, etc. We also have religions that Arabs and hence Arab Americans connect with kind of outside of these major monotheistic religions, right? Religions that kind of come before or after some of these major monotheistic religions. So we don't use religion necessarily as a unifying factor. But again, that's something that even Arab Americans commonly think of as something that's unifying. So but we don't use religion. What we do use are these other two factors, right? So we use a shared history and culture between all 22 of these countries. Again, lots of similarities, but also a lot of differences. If anybody is a food connoisseur of Arabic food, you may know that there's a lot of differences when it comes to the food. So for example, hummus is something that we are all pretty familiar with. Hummus is a very Levantine dish, right? It's very Lebanese, Syrian, Palestinian, Jordanian, kind of that area. Whereas if you go to like Sudan or Oman or some of these other countries, hummus is just not a part of the cuisine. Or again, for example, with food, almost all 22 countries, if not all of them, have some type of kebab that they might use, whether it's lamb or beef or chicken. But how they season them, the spices that they use really differs from country to country. And again, we can see numerous examples of that. So there's a shared history and culture between the countries. And then there's also the membership in the League of Arab States, or the Arab League for short. And that's more of a UN type of league where all 22 countries belong to the Arab League, which helps out with like economic, cultural, and political issues that may arise. So, right, so these are our three kind of unifying factors. And so when we talk about the mission of the museum, these are the countries that our community connects with some way, whether it's linguistically, culturally, in a variety of ways. So how do we tell the story of Arab Americans, right? We tell it through accuracy and authenticity. As I mentioned before, one of the reasons the museum exists is to accurately talk about the Arab American community. So our goal is to tell it accurately and authentically, having as much representation and representing the diverse population as much as possible. As you can imagine, that's a real challenge just because you're talking about 22 different countries, not to mention the diversity that exists within each of these countries, let alone the whole 22 countries. So what we do is we do a pretty good job. I think, again, we can always get better, but I think we do a pretty good job at representing the folks that come from these 22 different countries, not only in the exhibitions that we have, but also through public programs, right? You saw some of the public programs in kind of that video. You saw some artists and some folks that were dancing and telling stories. So we also tell the story of Arab Americans, our diversity and our representation through our public programs that we do. In terms of, again, theater, dance, music, things like that. Also, we have our film programming as well. So our film program can also tell the story of Arab Americans that we may not necessarily be strongly reflected in our exhibits. Although, again, that's something that we're definitely working towards. But, again, definitely a work in progress, as with any institution reflecting a large community. One of our goals is to build relationships with the communities. And I think Crystal might talk a bit about that in terms of just like the things that we collect from the community. But one thing that we definitely try to do is like build strong relationships with the community, right? We can't have a successful museum and continue to build and collect items if we don't have any strong relations with the community. So the success of the museum really kind of depends on the relationships and the intimacy that we have with our communities, not only collecting items from them, collecting stories, oral histories, objects, but also inviting them to the table to discuss a wide variety of things, having them come to our public programs, having them be ambassadors for the museum, whether locally or nationally. And so these relationships really, are pretty successful, I think, but also are continue to, I guess, measure the success of the museum by continuing those really strong relationships. And then, of course, relatability, right? We want our exhibits to be relatable to the general public. One of the most exciting things, I think, for me, as somebody who's been in the education department, is being able to see students and adults and really just folks in the community come to the museum and see themselves reflected in our exhibits. It's really adorable when we see, especially like young kids that come into the museum and they're like, oh my gosh, like I haven't, if they see a story about like Ahmed Ibrahim, who we'll take a look at in a minute, like kids being like, oh my gosh, I have an Uncle Ahmed, or oh my gosh, like my uncle's in here, or like we see a lot of people that will come and look at the exhibits and say, oh my gosh, that's my great grandfather, or that's my that's my cousin's wife, or whatever the case is, right? And it's really cool to see folks be able to relate to the exhibits either directly personally, or just seeing names that they have in their family, or seeing their country of origin reflected in a museum. Because again, you don't often see that in textbooks. You don't often see that in other museums or other large platforms. Telling our story through objects. So one of the ways we successfully tell the story of Arab Americans is through objects, right? Is through these things that, again, are relatable to the community. You can see a couple of examples of things that we have in our exhibits, that are hanging in our exhibits. One thing that we do really well is, like with this suitcase that you can see here on the left side, is we'll do some type of like immigration activity, right? We'll talk about, okay, here's a giant trunk. This trunk actually is something that somebody who immigrated to the US from Yemen actually brought with them when they immigrated to the US. So we'll use this as a way to say, okay, guys, like, let's put ourselves in the shoes of this individual. Say you're packing your suitcase. Say you can fit 10 items in your suitcase. What are some things you want to pack with you in your suitcase? And it gets folks to understand some of the difficult decisions folks had to make when they were immigrating to the US. So it allows them to put themselves in the shoes of these folks without being political, right? If we look at the atmosphere now, even the mention of immigrant or refugee is unfortunately political by nature, just kind of in terms of where we're at now. So it allows folks to put themselves in the shoes of an immigrant or a refugee without being political, or without having to push like a specific narrative. It's just more of a humanizing thing, because those are some very difficult decisions, right? Deciding what you're going to pack. And of course, it changes between the experiences of immigrants and, of course, refugees. So we do a lot of like storytelling through our objects. We do a lot of relatability through these objects, and again, try to be as diverse when when talking about our objects. And again, I know Krista will cover a lot of that in her presentation. I'm not going to go through this, but we do highlight different periods of Arab immigration. So you can kind of see the major time periods of Arab immigration that we kind of discuss. First time period, 1880s to the early 1920s. We see the first large bulk of Arab immigrants. And then the second time period from the 20s until about the mid 1960s. And again, this is just to kind of share the different stories that we tell. So when we talk about the first time period of immigration, we talk about kind of the big picture, but then we also supplement that with like people's specific stories. So I won't click it per se, but like if when we're doing a presentation, we can click this little sound bar and it'll give us a 4-minute interview with Eva Habib's, not her relatives per se, but kind of the experiences that she may have went through, right? We talk to it's like a 4-minute recording of folks who had family that worked in the auto industry in the early days that match up kind of with Eva Habib's story. So we talk about why folks are coming here to Metro Detroit, for example. This is one of the major reasons because of the auto industry. And then of course we supplement that with oral histories that we've recorded, with photographs, and also kind of dispelling stereotypes, right? The fact that we have women from the Arab world who, Arab immigrants who are working in the auto industry, it starts to kind of also chip away at those stereotypes that Arab women can't work and Arab men are very controlling and they want their women at home. So it also kind of starts to dispel the stereotypes of the community unintentionally in some cases as well, right? Why is it important to tell personal stories? I think this is a really good example, right? And I'll let you kind of read this really quickly. And I'll also look at the chat. So is Arab identity determined by birth? That's a good question. It kind of, but it's also determined by your own kind of identity, right? So like you have a lot of folks that live in those countries that don't necessarily identify as Arab. So for example, Chaldeans it's a huge population, at least here in Metro Detroit, that they're mostly Christian Iraqis. And even though they live in Iraq, they might speak Arabic, they may be connected to the culture, but many of them don't identify as Arab. Even though they have all the qualifications per se, but they may not identify as Arab because a lot of them say, you know what, we were in Iraq before Arabs came with their language, their culture. And even though we might speak Arabic, our roots, our core is not Arab per se. So identity really is more of a personal choice, but in general, there is some connection to one or more of the 22 countries. There's some type of connection linguistically, whether you or your ancestors spoke Arabic, and there's also a connection to the culture, whether it's the food or the clothing. But again, it really depends. Again, so as an example, my grandparents didn't necessarily identify as Arab. They identified as Lebanese. They identified as coming from Lebanon, but they didn't embrace an Arab identity versus myself that identifies as Arab American. So it's definitely complicated. And oh, yes. And you'll find that with other communities as well. You know, you'll find that with like the Latin community. You'll find that with so many communities that their identity really kind of depends on their roots. Or whatnot. So good question though. Thank you. So yeah, so scenario one, you'll kind of see the stories here being laid out, like, Arab immigrants coming in the second time period, it's just kind of very, very matter of fact, which is great. When we add in that personal story, you don't have to read all of this, but when we add in that personal story, so it has kind of the same initial language, but then it introduces Ahmed Ibrahim, who comes from Palestine, who's forcibly removed from his home due to the creation of the state of Israel in 1948. And he brings all these things with him. So it really adds to the story of history. We know the history, but inserting these personal stories, these photographs, this personal narrative really kind of helps to bring things to light, right? Again, I'll kind of skip over this, but you can see the different time periods of Arab immigration, third time period, 60s to the 90s, and the fourth period up until today. So I hope that gives you a good sense of the Arab American community and kind of why the museum exists and kind of who we are. And I'm going to turn it over to Crystal to share a bit more in terms of the preservation, the actual like documenting, presenting, and preserving aspects. So Crystal, it is all yours.
Thank you, Dave, for that warm introduction. I am going to screen share. It is, okay. Bear with me one moment, it's giving me troubles. Sorry, stand by for technical difficulties. I apologize.
No worries, Crystal, do your thing. Let me know when you're ready. But in the meantime, as Crystal,
Is it an issue with Zoom? Sorry, is there something I can?
I've shared with Zoom before, but it's telling me now that I have to change my settings. So I've got to go into my settings and change something, it seems.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, if there are any questions, please drop them in the chat. We can have a short question time followed by a longer question time later. I had a question. You're obviously extremely experienced in presenting on the museum, Dave. Do you change your approach depending on whether you have an Arab American audience or a non-Arab American audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. We approach each group pretty uniquely. And so if it's a non-Arab group, we'll present it in a very different way than an Arab group. So if we have a bunch of Arab American folks, we try as much as we can to get them excited to present, right? So for like the map, for example, we'll, instead of talking about the diversity of language and the diversity of food, we'll have them participate and say, okay, guys, like, you know, when you greet somebody for the first time, how do you greet people? And it allows them to like present and share their language while educating other folks in the group. Like I've learned a lot from different communities just by being on tour. Like they'll teach, like I'm Lebanese, so they'll teach me about like Iraqi culture and Iraqi dialect and Yemeni dialect and so on and so forth. So it's a good way for us to kind of like have them introduce their culture by participating versus me having to like lecture at them when they're like, yeah, we already know this. So it's definitely done in a different approach.
All right, sorry about that. It looks like I'm good to go. Thank you for your
Perfect.
patience. I am. All right, looks like we are sharing. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I am Crystal McColl. I'm one of the curators here at the museum, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about collecting and our community engagement, how we use our collections in-house and out-of-house with our community. So as Dave mentioned, we did open up in 2005. We've been open for 17 years now. We are the inception of the museum came out of a project of Access, our parent organization. They had a cultural arts department, and from there they had a very unique opportunity and grassroots connection with our community, local community. So when we opened in 2005, the majority of our objects that we opened with were donated to us by our local community, which I feel is very impressive for a museum. Because we are located, as Dave said, in the heart of Dearborn, which has the largest concentration of Arab Americans in the country. We are on Anishinaabe territory and next door to Detroit, which is a Black majority city. The building itself is 40,000 square feet, plus in 2015, we opened an annex, which is adjacent to us. And we do a lot of programming and educational opportunities in there. It's not so much a place for us that we display our collections, just due to climate control and things like that. We keep them here on this side of the building. So we have our really 5 areas that we engage with the community with our collections. It's our core galleries and our temporary galleries that we do here in-house. We also have, as Dave has mentioned, our public and educational programs, and then our artist in residence program, where each month or for a couple of months we'll house a new resident across the street. And they'll come and do engagement with us at public programming or creating art. Sorry. Soon we are launching our new mission statement, which really gets to the heart of what we're doing here, acting as a touchstone, connecting communities to Arab American culture and experiences. So as I mentioned, everything in our collections is somehow related to the 5 areas, like our core exhibits, which when you first walk into the museum, we have contributions from the Arab world, which is our courtyard. And then if you go upstairs, we have our 3 core exhibits. Let me minimize that. We have Coming to America, Living in America, and Making an Impact. So the contributions courtyard introduces cultural outputs from Arab communities. We cover language, religion, art and science, and music in this area. This is pretty much painting that larger picture of orienting our guests and our visitors of where Arab Americans are from, and just kind of the background history of the region and the lands. In this area, I would say a majority of our items are not from our community, because this is more historically cultural artifacts. So these are, if not acquired elsewhere, then there are a lot of our objects on loan here. And then, as Dave was mentioning, Coming to America, this outlines periods of immigration with personal stories of immigrants. A large majority here, you will find personal artifacts from families that they've donated to the museum, that we showcase, like stories of coming over from the Titanic, to ones here living in America, how they acquired work, what kind of work that they were doing, and how the family moved forward. Living in America outlines the building of communities in the U.S., keeping family traditions and culture alive. So we have a kitchen in Living in America, where our visitors can engage with different, they're not real foods, but different types of objects that would represent the foods and things that you would see in an Arab American's kitchen, like the coffee maker and what would be inside the refrigerator. And then moving on to Making an Impact, this we like to think of as our Hall of Fame. So here we have known entertainers, writers, scientists that have made major breakthroughs in their fields. We try to have a wide net here for Arab Americans that have had making an impact. And then in our lower level, in the basement, we have a new art gallery, which here we are showcasing from our collections, art that's been acquired either through purchases, or a lot of our purchasing for artwork has recently just started with us building our own funds for that. But a lot of the artwork that we have acquired is from donations from community members who have gone out and engaged with the local and national Arab American art scene, and has said, hey, I think this warrants being in the museum. Let's donate this to you. And so that's also how we kind of build and still keep maintaining those relationships with our community and also donors. Moving on to collection methods. So we have passive connections, direct, indirect. Community is huge for us, but we also realize that with community, it's ever changing and growing and has different priorities over time. And that there's different generations have different cultural, religious, and differences as well. So there's a lot of intersectionalities that we try to cover with our collecting and engagement with our communities. So some active ways of like content theme collaboration is, well, look, here you'll see down here, if you could see my cursor, we have the bottom middle image, the Patriots and Peacemaker traveling exhibit that we had, which is going out and engaging with communities. It's also simultaneously preserving that history by showcasing it, but also educating the community at the same time. Other collection methods are more like guerrilla and independent, or what we'd call guerrilla efforts, you know, where it's directed by us internally, staff and leadership, who are going out into these different community events and taking our own photographs of what's happening, of recent and past protests that have happened, to show solidarity within those intersectionalities of community, because we are located next to Detroit. Historically, the museum and Access has been very large advocates for Black rights and issues going on, also like voter issues in the state and things like that. Just to continue, this was 2020 here on the left, 2020 protest that was outside the Arab American National Museum in support and solidarity for Palestinians, and recent horrific events that were going on there. So we've also have acted as a place where these events can start off. And so I believe this was by photograph taken from a coworker, but also out collecting things that come into the mail, such as re-elected Rashida, and local politics that are going on, as a way we try to engage with the community and preserve what's happening here in our own community. I touched a little bit on traveling exhibits, but kind of bring it more full face, as we are traveling our Arab Americans History, Culture, and Contributions banners. This is our most active traveling exhibit right now. Each banner, as you can see, has a theme within history, culture, and contributions. So we orient the visitors with this banner of talking about Arab world generally, and then coming to America, and then what those experiences are here in America, and then breaking it down into more themes of like making an impact, living in America. So it's kind of like the museum. I think of it as a mini museum that's out there. And then lastly, we do have our digital scrapbooks and oral histories that we are always working on. And this is, again, donations and stories from the community telling their story. I would love to share with you one, since we have time.
I'm Jalila Mansour, and I was born August 15, 1921. I was born in Ramallah, Palestine. I'm a Christian Arab. The outfit is not mine. I bought it. Okay. When I decided to come to the United States, I said I have to take the outfit with me and show them some of our culture, you know. Yes. So I brought it. I used it one time in college to show it to the girls. You know, there was some gathering or something like that. The outfit that I have here is not used for every day. It's usually used for certain occasions, weddings or evening things or something. And the jacket, which is it's in velvet, you know. It's not made in Ramallah. Oh. It is made in Bethlehem. Oh, okay. And it is stitched out with golden thread, and everything is done by hand. Well, the hat, this outfit, you know, usually these yellow things, you know, imitation, they are usually in gold. Sleeves are used to hold them on both hands, and they dance with them. The belt, yeah, it is. It's the same like the original one, and the women wear them with the outfit. And as I said, they have little pockets inside where they keep money or candy for the kids or something. Yeah, a young lady of 16 or 17, or before she gets married, she starts embroidering this. Oh, yes. This is something that she takes with her from her parents' house, usually.
This $79 headlamp is taking the world by storm. Don't buy another flashlight until you've seen what this new headlamp can.
Sorry about that. And so what you can definitely see here with like our oral histories is we think of them as special collections and contains everything that we could make available. It's a little bit of an interview to get the story out, as well as showcasing the artifacts that they've donated, like you see here with Mansour's Tetris Palestinian embroidered outfit from Ramallah, Bethlehem. So the object here is an example of folk tradition that remains culturally relevant today, given the spread of the diaspora. She has here a ceremonial object that's used for a special occasion, personal objects that are deemed worthy enough to travel overseas. And, this has been preserved for decades. And even more than that, we're able to show that we have a first person account of the woman who wore it. And so we have a whole digital scrapbook series listed on our YouTube page. And also another outreach initiative that we do with our community is weekly From the Archives posts on our social media. So that touches Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And these are typically, we try to do weekly posts. And sometimes we'll have an image from the community that we haven't been able to identify everyone in the image. And we've had instances where people are like, oh, that's my uncle. And they start tagging who's in the image. And so that's also been a great way for us to engage and work with our community to identify even objects that we have that we don't necessarily have the full information on. So that will conclude my presentation, and I thank you all, and looking forward to questions.
Thank you so much, guys. Those were such amazing presentations. Anybody who's got a question, please drop them in the chat. I'm very eager to hear them. I've got quite a few, so I guess if anybody's typing one, I'll just get one in the meantime. You mentioned that your new mission statement was connecting communities with Arab American heritage. Can you speak a little to what you want to achieve with different communities if you succeed in connecting them? Does it change within, obviously it's going to change within like different countries of Arab Americans and different age groups, but also outside of Arab American communities? What is it that you are hoping to achieve?
I'll take a stab at it, and if Dave, you want to step in. I think initially what I think of is really for connecting other communities that are Arab American is definitely like bringing awareness to the intersectionalities, that they're not all unified, they're not all Christians, or they're not all Muslims. I think when I first started working here, I didn't realize that there was an assumption by other communities that aren't Arab Americans that, oh, they're all Muslim. So like the first couple of tour groups that I witnessed, hearing them like that assumption made, I was like, oh, I had no idea. I think I was filtered because of my own upbringing and education, that brought an awareness to me that like, oh, we do have a duty here of say, not every generation is the same. Not everyone is hijabi, there's a lot of different variations. And I think this is true with any group of people, is that there's a lot of differences to educate and bring awareness about.
Yeah, I can add a little bit onto that. I think Crystal did a really good job kind of defining exactly what our goal is. I think like also like our previous mission statement, like the whole like to document, present, and preserve the history, culture, and contributions. It's a great mission, but it's also very literal. And like Crystal kind of mentioned, like there's so many needs to the community. We mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So the idea of like a cultural touchstone, I think, is a better way to kind of identify what the museum is because, we mean so much to different folks, and like we mean something to like immigrant populations, and that those needs and the desire to connect with the museum is very different from like a fourth generation family that has German roots or something like that, you know, who are still interested in connecting with the museum, but they're also getting something totally different out of the experience. So I think it's a way for us to continue to serve the community, like all the different communities that we connect to, and folks could kind of like take and utilize the museum for what they will, versus us being like, no, we're going to document, preserve, and present, which is great, but again, it doesn't fully address, I think, what we do.
No, that's fantastic answers. Thank you. And I guess leading on from that, you touched on this a little bit, Crystal, and I think you also did, Dave, with it's become such a political issue, especially in America. And maybe this is just a sick fascination from Australia looking in, but has the museum had to take somewhat of a political stance, or how does the museum operate politically?
That is a great question. So as a museum, we are not allowed to be political. We cannot go in and start even though we may want to at many times, but we cannot be political in nature. So what we've done, and I'm sure Crystal can weigh in also on this, just in terms of like the things that we might collect and how we talk about like certain things, like with Palestine or whatnot, is without being like directly political, we're just here to like tell the story of Arab Americans. And so with Palestine, Israel, for example, it's always, you can't talk about Palestine and Israel without being political. So what we do is, without taking sides per se, is we will address the issue through the items that are donated, the oral histories that have been recorded, the personal experiences of Palestinians. And so and that's something that you can't take away. Whatever your position is, you can't negate the stories of people who lived these experiences. So it's not a way, we're not being like directly political where it's like we stand with this side, but it's more of like, come and like educate yourself, listen to the real experiences by these folks, and then the real objects that they brought with them and why they immigrated to America and all that. With things maybe not as obvious as like Palestine, Israel, like when it comes to like political like elections, things that we're seeing, we are not choosing one side over the other, but we'll do events where and I think Crystal mentioned this, we'll do events that focus on get out and vote. Why is it important to vote? Or like we just did an event that talked about Arab American representation in politics. So not being political, like vote for Arab Americans, but like, why is it necessary that we have Arab Americans in the political system? You know, why is it important for Arab Americans to vote and have a voice? Those types of things.
I'd also like to add on, I had touched briefly about from the archives. That's another way of, if something in the news is relevant going on, a way to reach the audience and stay kind of current or up to speed with current events is we'll pull something from our archives or from our collection and showcase it in a weekly social media post to highlight, you know, that storytelling that Dave's talking about of like, this is a person's perspective. Also, you know, like how it connects to the wider story that's happening or current event that's going on, but also without being overtly political, just like we're just storytelling here. And it really moves people. I've seen people cry because we had a Palestinian immigrant bring dirt from Palestine that he put into an old pill bottle, because that's how important it is to preserve that history, that connection to his homeland, and to really kind of like pause and think about like your dirt was so important that you had to bring it over with you. I think that that's really like powerful storytelling that we're able to engage with.
Yeah, that is amazing, and a really fantastic way of going about it. I am a little bit wary of time because we are closing in on the hour mark, but just one last question. Oops, sorry. The map that you showed, Dave. I had no idea that Arab community spread over such a large area. I guess this is more of a historical question, but when did that Arab identity come about? Because I think the main categorization there to me seemed language, and then maybe the other two like came later, but that could be just me projecting. I'd be very interested to know the answer.
Yeah, no, of course. It's a good question and something that we get often. And Crystal can also weigh in because I know she also has some Middle Eastern studies under her belt. But yeah, really, like, I think it really came from the spread of Islam. And even though we don't use religion as like a unifying factor, like it's interesting because like with the spread of Islam came the Arabic language, right? And so that's what really kind of soaked in, because like when Islam kind of spread to these countries, coming from Saudi Arabia, kind of going out, of course, Islam spread, but a lot of communities, Christians, Jews, folks who were already living in these countries were able to freely practice their religion. So there wasn't a lot of like forced conversion. I mean, you always have a few idiots who are trying to, do that kind of thing. But as a whole, there was not a lot of forced conversion. In fact, it was, from what I remember in history class, it was not, they didn't want them to convert because they had to pay like a special tax. So it was income for the empire that was ruling at the time. But anyways, so that's kind of where it stemmed from, is like the spread of Islam. And it wasn't the religion that was spreading it, but it was more of like the Arabic language that people spoke, but that was also the language of the Quran. So I've never thought about it that way, but I guess that would be a good assumption, is that like the language was kind of the first unifying factor. And then from there you have the culture and the history as time kind of goes on. And then the Arab League is kind of like an important unifying factor, but definitely the lesser of the three, if we're talking like hardcore identifying factors.
I would think the only thing to really add to that is after World War II, when territories getting divided up amongst the Western countries, and that really kind of, I think, also complicated things with like what is Arab like identity and culture wise too. So I think that's where more modern, because my Middle East studies background is more modern focused. And so that's, I think, added a lot of complexities and layers, because then you also have diaspora and like full swing because people are fleeing these countries and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for those answers, guys. I think we'll leave it there. But thank you so much for presenting. I'm so energized by both of your presentations. They were so fantastic. You guys are obviously super experienced. So thank you so much. If you have any closing remarks as well, please go ahead.
No, just thank you again for having us. It's always good to connect with folks, especially folks that are not like in our immediate backyard, even though that's always wonderful and welcome. It's nice to kind of meet folks and interact with folks that are outside of our backyard. So thank you so much for having us. And I hope you'll see the museum as a resource. I mean, Crystal like went over a lot of really awesome resources that are at your fingertips, like simply going onto our website and going onto our YouTube page. So I hope that you'll interact with us. A lot of what we do exhibit wise, but also like public programming wise, is accessible to like virtual audiences across the US and sometimes even beyond. So I hope that you'll come and visit the museum one day, but that you'll also stay connected to us by engaging in our programs, going to our website, things like that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.